Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Sarah Rumpf, contributing editor at Mediaite. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks. Good to see you again, Brittany.
Good to see you as well. It has been a really messy week for 30 Rock, so we're going to dive right into it. Former RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel was hired and then subsequently fired in a matter of days as a contributor for NBC News. What do you think of this? How do you think it all played out? What's your reaction?
Well, this is just one of those things where in hindsight, you look at it and, could it have gone more poorly? We've got reports now that the NBC executives were apparently working on this behind the scenes and were negotiating all of this. And so when their on-air talent was shocked by it, that they kind of were taken aback. But, it's one of those things. It's like you were surprised that Rachel Maddow and the Morning Joe crew and Chris Hayes were not fans of Ronna McDaniel. Okay, well, have you seen their shows? The second this was announced, it was met with this like immediate vitriolic, angry, furious reaction. Like every single one of the opinion show hosts basically devoted a significant section to their show denouncing it. And let's be really clear. And I had a Center Clip short podcast on this. The issue was not that she was an RNC chair. The issue was not that she was a Republican. And as much as, there's certain segments of the conservative media that are trying to portray it that way, that's not the issue. ABC News has George Stephanopoulos, who was with the Clinton White House, Dana Perino, and Nicole Wallace for Fox and MSNBC, respectively, are both Bush alum. That's not the issue. The issue is that Ronna McDaniel was at the center of the efforts to overturn the 2020 election. She was directly communicating with the people who were being recruited to be part of the fake electors scheme from Michigan. She was making public statements on Fox News and in speeches that were directly promoting the idea that the election was being stolen by fraud, when we know now, like, there is no evidence that this was stolen by fraud. Like I keep, beating this drum, but people need to remember there were over 60 court cases in state and federal courts across this country, many with Republican appointed judges, some appointed by Trump himself. Every single one found no evidence to move forward to even consider whether the election should be overturned in a single precinct, much less a single state, and definitely not the multiple states overturning that would need to happen for the election and the electoral college tally to go from Biden to Trump. So she was a part of all that. And remember, with Trump as the presumptive Republican nominee, he is a big part of the 2024 media story. And he is still claiming that the 2020 election was stolen. He is calling the January 6th defendants hostages. He is still promoting all of this. So how do you hire somebody who was a part of encouraging all that and participating in it herself to be a media commentator? That's the issue. That's the problem.
She had an interview on Meet the Press over the weekend, and it's funny because her contract reportedly was $300,000 a year, so $600,000 total for 2 years. Politico broke it down and said she was getting paid probably $500 a second for this one interview if she does in fact get paid out. But in the interview, she said that President Biden won 2020 fair and square, and he's the legitimate president. Do you think this sort of backtracking then was enough?
It really isn't, because she's still not taking back what she said, and she's continued to question she'd questioned the legitimacy of the results in several states. And again, the idea that she was somebody that was directly communicating with people both on the Trump campaign side and the people that were being recruited to be fake electors, she was a part of all that. There is no way that that's not going to continue to be an issue with a nominee from one of the two major parties continuing to make those claims. If she's an on-air commentator and NBC is covering a Trump rally or covering a debate and Trump makes these claims, how is any of her commentary going to be valid or trustworthy on that issue? So it's, I made the joke, if you're going to have a debate about climate change and what should be the good policies and what should government do, you wouldn't invite somebody who's a flat earther. If you're having a debate about anti-Semitism on college campuses, you don't bring somebody into the discussion who's insisting that the Jews are controlling the weather with giant space lasers. Like there's a point where you've destroyed your credibility and your validity for the audience.
Something that you mentioned earlier, an important piece of this story is that the backlash from top talent at MSNBC was swift. It started with Chuck Todd really after the Kristen Welker interview on air. Rachel Maddow spoke out against it. The Morning Joe crew, Nicole Wallace. Have you ever, when in covering media, seen this type of public fallout where they're talking about an MSNBC or network decision on air? And B, what did you make of this? Did you think it was performative? Did you think it was brave, pearl clutching? What do you make of this?
I mean, the only thing in recent memory that comes up is maybe, some of the chaos that happened at CNN, and Oliver Darcy, who's their senior media reporter, was very direct and very scathing in the Reliable Sources newsletter, a CNN newsletter, talking about some of the decisions made by the network top brass. And there was certainly a lot of like media outlets like we reported on things, and we had sources within the network that were grumbling about things, and different there were a lot of media reports about the chaos and a lot of people that were leaking. It wasn't so much, I can't recall though seeing anything where you had like basically the entire schedule of MSNBC for about a 24-hour period. Every single show, the headline person was coming on and saying, I disagree with what my company is doing, every single show. So, looking into it, one of our sources at MSNBC confirmed the MSNBC host and all of those shows, they have editorial control over their own programs, over who they're inviting as guests, what they're covering. So, this idea that NBC, the larger company, was going to hire Ronna McDaniel, none of those shows, when they say she wasn't going to be on MSNBC, that was a real thing, because those shows control who they're putting on the air, and she was not going to get an invite to the party.
The chair of NBC News reportedly said this in a letter to staff. I'll read part of it and I would love your reaction. Quote, no organization, particularly a newsroom, can succeed unless it is cohesive and aligned. Over the last few days, it has become clear that this appointment undermines that goal. I want to personally apologize to our team members who felt we let them down. While this was a collective recommendation by some members of our leadership team, I approved it and take full responsibility for it. What do you make of this backtrack? What do you make of this apology?
I mean, that definitely seems like the right thing to do. He had, his key on-air personalities, their top talent, who were very angry and upset and felt, betrayed by the tone of what they were saying. It's an interesting thing, because the idea of trying to reach out to Republican viewers and trying to reach out to Trump supporters isn't in and of itself an invalid thing. Like a media company should, consider the fact that there are Americans with multiple viewpoints, multiple political views out there. That wasn't the problem. Ronna McDaniel perhaps was not the right avatar for that sort of goal. Besides the fact that, she participated in all this mess with the 2020 election, she's not even necessarily the right person to be winning over Republicans or Trump supporters right now, because there's a lot of mainstream Republican voters who blame her in large part for the party's struggles in the past few years. The red wave that didn't materialize in the 2022 midterms. There's a lot of, Trump supported candidates that completely flopped. And then, Trump himself had lost faith in her. She's no longer the RNC chair because the guy who is the spiritual head of the party lost faith in her. and has now basically installed his daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, as co-chair. So, it's an interesting, sort of pick. MSNBC trying to make sure that they're not just speaking to the far left of the American electorate, is a good thing. I think what may be a better tactic for them is to give up on the idea of finding some magical unicorn Republican commentator that they can bring on who isn't a, cynical never Trumper like myself, is still an active Republican. The idea that there's somebody that can talk on all issues may actually be too big of a task. But there are people who are subject matter experts on different policy issues, people who have the expertise and experience from different states. If there's an issue coming up in Georgia or Michigan, Arizona, Florida, find someone who is, local to that state, familiar with the electorate, and talk about those issues. Bring people on for the specific news story of the day. That's going to take more homework. That's going to take more outreach now, getting a roster together of several dozen people. But that's going to be more informative. I can't tell you how many times as a native Floridian, I've watched some national news story or read something in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, where they're talking about Florida, and I just roll my eyes at the inaccuracies and the misperceptions. And we're a pretty big state. I can't imagine how irritated people from rural Michigan or, areas of Northern California or Idaho view the DC and New York media.
That's a really interesting point. And something else that you said that stuck out to me is that she is an interesting choice because she was a pro-Trump voice. Trump has spoken out against her. She's no longer at the RNC. But Trump is the standard bearer of his party right now. He's the presumptive nominee. Do you think this is effectively shutting out pro-Trump voices from mainstream media networks?
I mean, the idea that they hired Ronna McDaniel and then gave up on her when their entire roster revolted is shutting out pro-Trump voices. I mean, MSNBC wasn't ever the place for that at all. Somebody who is very conservative, somebody who has already voted for Trump once or multiple times, probably isn't tuning into MSNBC to begin with. I don't know that the Ronna McDaniel thing is really that, but it's an ongoing pattern. It's just not the pro-Trump network, and it probably never will be.
Politico is reporting that she's looking to be paid her full contract, which, as we said earlier, is apparently in the neighborhood of $600,000. She was on MSNBC or NBC News Contributor for less than a week. So what is the likelihood that she's going to be paid out at all or even in full?
So the way that works is with basic contract law, if you show up and you're ready, willing, and able to fulfill your part of the contract. And look, she showed up, she was on air. Kristen Welker introduced her saying, "You're now a paid contributor." There's no question that she showed up and tried. It does seem that she did sign the contract. There's multiple reports saying that. If the contract said you will be paid $300,000 a year for a 2-year term, and NBC's the one to break that, then there is a good chance that she may be able to make an argument to collect all of that. Now, often in contracts, you'll see different termination clauses. You'll see a probation period with an employment contract. You'll see some certain things that give the hiring employer some sort of termination rights, or a set of what they call liquidated damages, where if this contract is terminated in the first month, then you get X dollars. If it's terminated after 6 months, you get Y dollars. If it's terminated after a year, you get, Z. If there's something like that that's spelled out, then that may limit her damages. I can't reasonably conceive anything that NBC can say on their side where she breached it, because any of her past behavior or commentary was already known before they entered into this contract. They can't sign a contract with her and say, well, we're terminating you now because of what you did after the 2020 election and things that you said in January 2021. And that's preceding the contract. That's not fair. So there's been some other discussion over whether she may have a right to additional damages and intentional infliction of emotional distress and hostile work environment and everything else. That's going to be a lot harder to prove, because criticizing somebody on a factual basis and, the MSNBC, everybody on air pretty much, it seems, saying critical things about her, it may have been mean, it may have not been fun, but that's not really the same thing as what you traditionally see giving cause for a hostile work environment claim, where you're getting sexually harassed, or you're getting physically assaulted in the workplace, or somebody's making an unsafe environment, getting critical things said about you because of things that you actually did say and do. That's going to be a bit of a bigger hill to climb.
You called this a revolt earlier, certainly a firestorm for NBC as a whole. What do you think this saga then shows us about the state of cable news now?
In some ways, I do sympathize with the criticisms that a lot of the on-air personalities were saying, but it does give me pause, because one of the problems that we've got, both politically and just in terms of the civic society of this country, is how siloed we are politically. It is not good or healthy for half of the country to be only talking to itself and to view the other half of the country as evil and dumb and trying to destroy America. And when you look at the rhetoric that's coming from a lot of the partisans, and I know I'm going to get accused of playing the both sides game here, but there's different people and actors on both sides that are doing this to different degrees and different degrees of mendacity about it. But you don't see where a Republican or Democrat is saying that the other side's policy is bad, or that's too much of a tax increase, or that's not efficient, or that's not the most strategic policy. They're saying this is trying to destroy America. Biden's border policy is going to, ruin America. Your children are going to die because of this. This Democrat policy is going to, destroy the school system, and this is an attack on churches, and the Republicans are racist and are trying to demonize XYZ category of people. It's how do you have a debate with somebody when they're trying to destroy America and murder your children and knock down your church? That's it ends up just being this ongoing problem. I've always advocated that no matter where you are in the political sphere, at least once a week, flip to another channel, read some other websites from the other side. You don't have to change any of your views, but just see what the other side is saying. And I've often said, like, if you see the same story reported by both CNN and Fox, and then you put all the facts together, where there's overlap, you can feel pretty comfortable that you're getting a accurate view of the story. If you're seeing people from both the right and the left agreeing on things, and again, when you have a fuller picture of what the story actually is, what the debate actually is, you're more informed as a voter and just as a citizen participating in this country.
You left us with that advice the last time we spoke, and I think it's great advice.
I think saying it's important.
So everyone, listen to Sarah here. Sarah Rumpf, thank you so much for coming back on. I'm already looking forward to our next conversation.
All right. Thanks so much, Brittany. Have a good day.